All right, let's get into our panel discussion for the evening. It's been a very busy week politically, from the AU summit, where new leadership was elected, to the SONA debate, former EFF MP Mbuyiseni Ndlozi exiting politics, and the MK party battling internal strife. We discuss some of these developments with political analyst Lukhona Mnguni. We're joined by Africa-Asia Dialogue Director and Senior Research Fellow, Mr. Thembisa Fakude. And in studio, I'm joined by media analyst, Mr. Motale Phalane. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. A happy Sunday to you. And yeah, we appreciate the time. I want to start here, Mr. Phalane, here in studio. And I think what we can do is perhaps start with the events coming out of the AU summit. I think incredibly important, right? There is the issue of certainly whether there's interest, right? Number one, I think for many of our sort of viewers to even look at what actually are the internal wranglings of the AU, the Commission, and if even as we look at some of the discussion points that come out, if there's confidence that the AU, perhaps, even as they continue talking about the silencing of the guns, that it actually is effective?
Lady, I think it's very interesting to see what happened this past week. To a certain extent, you could see that there are parties who are interested in getting a solution to this impasse which has been going on. But from a South African point of view, I think what interests us most is that is an incident recently in the DRC of our 14 soldiers. Many people are not even aware that our soldiers have been there for the past decade. But what then happened, and all of a sudden people are now interested to what happened. And it coincided now with the AU summit, where we expected that people will start to be matured enough and start to realize that they're actually representing people, nations. But I think it was a busy week, but I think some of the parties did not show much effort to try to get that. They were too personal. We know that some delegates were prevented from attending, and there's little things which one would not expect, especially where lives are involved. This thing has been going on, affecting many other countries. I think, yeah, we could have done better.
Yeah. Thembisa, perhaps I bring you in here as well. And you, I imagine, with the Africa-Asia Dialogues, would have been looking at these discussions at the AU summit really quite closely. I mean, highlights that really stand out for you. And what you make also of the election of the chairperson, the leader of Djibouti. Is that the right person to take the organization forward?
Well, we have to wait and see, but it's interesting that we have a leader coming from Djibouti. I would have expected another woman, but there was no candidate, of course, occupying that position. AU is quite important, particularly at this point in our history and time, having to deal with the current conflict in the DRC. They have to deal with Trump as a bloc. But importantly also, they have to take certain geopolitical positions, particularly on issues involving the attack and the war on Gaza and the West Bank that's currently taking place. So it's going to be a busy year, and it requires quite a strong-willed and minded leader for the Commission. And one hopes, of course, that we're going to see decisions being made by the AU, and the African agenda taken forward is also going to be the first time that the AU will be sitting as a representative within the G20 meeting that will be taking place in South Africa in November.
Yeah, very important. Lukhona, I think I'm going to ask you the same question essentially that I brought to Mr. Phalane here about, oh goodness, you know, Agenda 2063, we talk over and over again about the silencing of the guns, and I wonder if as an analyst you watch on with confidence about the dialogue at the AU around, when you look at the war in Sudan, the escalating violence in the DRC, is there a sense that it's rhetoric with very little action and diplomatic action? One of the things that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres talked about at the summit is the need for intervention in violence that is not violent in and of itself, saying talk more.
Well, I mean, Naledi, these are very interesting developments and issues to be debating, I suppose, across the continent. The issue of silencing the guns has been with us for a very, very long time. And that's because some of the conflicts are interstate and some of them are within states themselves. And it becomes very difficult to understand what are the active steps that are being undertaken. And you've got to look at the constraining factors of the AU Constitutive Act itself in terms of what is permissible and what is available to the nations in terms of trying to silence those guns, because the Constitutive Act itself creates a lot of barriers in terms of how do you intervene in a state that seems to be, at odds with itself, where there's violence and so on. Because they are trying to create an AU where, interference with the sovereignty of the states is not, the easiest thing that is allowable or permissible. But I think if you want to silence the guns, there has to be much more eagerness and much more legislative accommodation to do that. But on the other side, I do think that, the continent has come a long way. South Africans would know that, our troops have been part of peacekeeping missions in a number of jurisdictions beyond the DRC. And I get the debate that is happening around the DRC, but Burundi, and many other jurisdictions, Darfur and so on, where we've been engaged as a nation to try and silence those guns. But the question is whether or not the methods and the mechanisms, as you are saying, silence the guns without necessarily using the guns. Is that the best method available to the continent and to the world in general? If you look at the developments in Ukraine and Russia, you've got to ask yourself a question that says, how do we get out of conflict without being conflictuous? And I think that's a very big question.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. But I want to move on because, my goodness, it's been such a busy week that we could look at quite a few themes. I actually want to start with this. EFF leader Julius Malema taking to the podium today and then addressing a matter that has been talked about for much of the week. Elon Musk calling for Julius Malema to be labeled an international criminal. This is what Julius Malema had to say. All right, we're trying to find that clip.
We will never be bullied that we must not speak against the brutality of Israel against Palestine. Why? When the children were being killed here in Soweto, it was Palestinians who stood up and said that is crime against humanity. Today, the whole nation is being wiped off in front of our eyes. We are being told to keep quiet, otherwise we are going to be declared international criminal. I'm so happy to be an international criminal. You know why? Because Nelson Mandela was an international criminal. That's what they declared him, for fighting for the freedom of our people. And if it means I'm joining in the ranks of Nelson Mandela by being declared an international criminal for fighting for the rights of my people, I'm a proud international criminal.
I'm a proud international criminal. As a media analyst, I immediately want to, get your view on the profile of the EFF when conversations like this certainly are taking place, right? Whether you're for or against, it seems like this is some interesting attention for the EFF, correct?
I agree with you, Naledi. I think what's very important is that the EFF is very good at not hijacking, but taking advantage of such incidents. And we all know about this circus of Musk and Trump, which has actually covered nearly every part of the media. And it seems Elon Musk knows how to get into the media as the week comes to an end and he starts another thing. And he knows parties like Julius are going to react to it. I think if it was possible, if you could just stop maybe the circus and wait and deal with more serious things.
Who, Elon Musk?
Yeah, I think because now he gets more attention than what's happening in the White House, because he seems to be part of the White House. And I think it's high time that the media start to pour water on his utterances, because I think they are not bringing any joy or stability to many people. Like in South Africa, we know what his utterances and President Trump has done to us, because we'll come and discuss that about the Afrikaners later.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. But Thembisa, let me bring you in here, because here's the thing. We also had such an interesting week in that you also saw Elon Musk holding a press briefing in the Oval Office wearing, a cap. And, I mean, what a moment, right? People talking about, even in that press briefing, media even trying to fact check some of the things that he has publicly said. So when he says Julius Malema should be labeled an international criminal, do you take it seriously?
Well, I do take it serious. So far, they've said a lot of outlandish things, and they seem to be, keen on carrying forward their threats. But regarding Julius Malema, I like to liken his situation to a DJ who's invited to an important nightclub. And you have to decide what to do with the platform. And I don't think it did well in that regard. I think he should have used the platform much better than what he did. Instead, he was playing to the South African gallery, and he forgot that he was invited to over 50 million viewership or followership on Twitter for him to comment. And what he did was, of course, he couldn't articulate himself, as far as I'm concerned, quite well when it comes to matters of international relations, and importantly on linking the current standoff between the US and South Africa and articulating that position as a statesman. I think he failed to do so. He was playing to his own followership, and he ignored the most important platform that was presented to him for free by Elon Musk.
But then what's the alternative, Thembisa? I mean, if you were Malema and you took the podium and you responded to calls for you to be labeled an international criminal, what is the right thing to say? He likened himself to a Nelson Mandela.
Well, first articulate and explain and unpack what the Expropriation Act is all about. Number two is expose Elon Musk for who he is. And third, I think, present yourself as an international statesman, or a national statesman for that matter. Articulate the position in a manner it is supposed to be articulated. But I think what it did was the continual usual barking that we always hear from Julius Malema, playing to the South African audience, forgetting that many people around the world don't necessarily understand his style of articulation, and he would have done much, much more better. Should have, if he really did do some preparation for this very, very huge platform that he was given last week.
Yeah, Lukhona, you can respond to your thoughts as well on how Malema responded to this international this international criminal issue. But I'm also quite keen to hear your view on another former now EFF figure that has got us talking, and in fact has, moved to the other side of the interview table and has joined us broadcasters as well. Did he make the right decisions, and have we lost something in Ndlozi?
I will try and not venture into the future of Ndlozi, because I mean he's moving to broadcasting in a slot that I actually hosted a number of years ago in that platform. Good luck to him, and I hope I will have an opportunity to see him and just chat. As you might know, media is probably one of the toughest areas to play in, and that's naturally because of the kind of leadership we see across the media houses. We see a leadership that lacks empathy and lacks, the steel of politics to stand up against anything that is deemed establishment. And those people who tend to speak against, the proverbial grain, as it were, tend to become victims much more quicker than anticipated. So let's see what his style of politics will be, how he wants to engage. was listening to his interview with his new boss, and I think that was quite interesting to listen to in terms of how he wants to pitch himself within the milieu of South African politics and non-racial and reconciliatory politics. But let's come back a bit to this Malema and Elon Musk / Trump issue.
Sure.
I think what we are seeing in the US is quite an interesting issue. And I think Thembisa is quite correct to say that, Malema must have known the stage that is availed to himself in terms of how to articulate. It's quite clear for me anyway that this has nothing to do with the Expropriation Act. It has nothing to do with personalities, but more to do with the fact that South Africa has taken a hard stance insofar as the Israel issue is concerned in the International Court of Justice, but also the reality that over the last 15 years, we have been talking in political science circles about the US losing its hegemony as a unipolar, country that, fundamentally influences global discourse. It almost seems like, for me, and I would love to hear Thembisa on this one, but it almost seems like, for me, this is the US now trying to test case whether or not the world can live without the US. And I think the big question is, for the US, what if the world can live without the US? What then becomes the place of the US? And I think that's a fundamental geopolitical question.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to be interrogating. Of course, there are money issues, indebtedness of countries. The US is highly indebted itself. Some people have been saying that this is a broke US trying to salvage and save some money and so on. But I think the big question in the room is, what if the world can live without the US? If you were to absent the threat of, nuclear weapons and nuclear war and so on. And I think that's a very fundamental question. And that's what I feel political actors are not attending to.
Thembisa, do you want to respond to that? Do you agree?
I totally agree. And I think for the first time, you have billionaires running a country. It's the first of its kind.
Yeah.
Billionaires and business people are driven by profit. And we've seen the behavior of billionaires and I don't want to use the word capitalists, but billionaires and businessmen in the past on their prioritization of profits. And this is going to be a challenge for Donald Trump because running a country involves, by and large, a huge part of social responsibility and some sort of a community stroke socialist type of thinking. And here we are with the majority of his cabinet being billionaires. We have to wait and see what's going to happen. But I think by the look of things and by the look of what Elon Musk and his new position as the leader or the head of Deutsche, which is part of a department within Trump that's trying to rectify and deal with mismanagement and the waste of money that has taken place over the past couple of years, hence their cutting of budgets and funding of US aid. You're going to have a lot of people not too long beginning to complain and protesting against Trump and his reforms because they are looking at retrenching thousands of civil servants within the American system, and that is going to create some serious grievances within the United States in the near future.
Yeah, just to actually let our viewers know that at 9 o'clock, we here on Newsfeed PM, the late edition, will be in conversation with the director of UNAIDS Eastern and Southern Africa to really talk about the issue, particularly around funding. But we're taking your calls on the stories that caught your attention in the week that was 0105946010, and certainly the direction that you'd like some of these conversations to go. Send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584. Lungelo's called in from Cape Town. Lungelo, good evening.
Good evening, ma'am. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine. Can't complain. Am I audible?
You're very well audible. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Look, ma'am, my comment on my side, I have an issue with the way America has handled us as a country. Okay? And I agree on the other side with Mr. Lukhona Mnguni that it's a wake-up call for our country not to depend in the West. And in fact, it's a wake-up call for all the African countries not to depend in the West. My interest in particular is with the summit that is currently going on in Tanzania.
In Ethiopia?
Yeah, in Ethiopia in particular. As to what is the current chairperson or whoever who's in charge now, what kind of posture is he going to take? You see, in particular with dealing the American factor. Okay?
Yeah.
And then in the issue of Mr. Julius Malema, for me, I don't have an issue with Malema, how he handled the matter. Elon Musk is just a non-issue, you know. And I don't know why he's getting a lot of attention, especially from the South African media in particular. He's just a non-issue. And Malema dealt with him correctly in the manner that he's dealt with him. You understand? And then my third point is with you guys as a mainstream media, especially here in South Africa. I have a problem with the mainstream media in South Africa. You are not tackling the factors that are affecting the country. In some cases, you are sugarcoating things instead of dealing with the things head on.
Like what?
There's a lot of things. Yeah? In particular, even when you're interviewing the president, for example, you're treating with kitty gloves. You are not dealing with the facts that are eating the country.
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying? So even in this issue of these Afrikaners who went to the U.S. embassy, for example, the 2 days ago, they went there to the U.S. embassy and then they said they are ready to go. You understand? And then you find that some of the comments that even other political analysts are saying, you find that there's some sort of begging.
All right, I got you, Lungalo. Yeah, I got you. That you want the media to be a little bit more, I suppose, accountable in really quite direct in how they handle some of these matters. Thank you so much for calling. We'll take more calls. 0105 946 010. Is it Asanda who's on the line with us? Asanda, good evening. Asanda, good evening. Oh, Asabonga, good evening.
Hey, my sister.
Yes, go ahead. But please switch off your TV. Otherwise, you're going to hear everything twice. Go ahead and speak, please.
Oh, all right, my sister. I don't know whether do you hear me now?
No, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, can I go ahead?
Yes, sir. You're alive.
Yes, my sister. Yeah, I just want to say, as I said before, when two bulls are fighting, the grass suffers.
Yeah.
So we have to bow down. We have to bow down to America, to talk to America, because this thing, it will affect the poor of the poorest.
All right. Yeah.
So
that's...
if I'm off the line, I'll eat a humble pie, but I don't see this matter growing legs and walk away. Cyril Ramaphosa must talk to Donald Trump in a polite way. We must not just say to Donald Trump, we are South Africa, we are not going to be bullied by America. We must talk in a way that is good, so that it can solve things.
Okay.
Hopefully you get me, my sister.
I get you. But thank you so much for that, Sabonga. You know, one of the things that Lungalo talked about, of course, that caller raising the issue of the Afrikaners who marched and protested outside the U.S. Embassy. Let's give you a quick reminder of really some of the things that were said at that protest. Take a look.
We are here in support of President Donald Trump's decisions to make statements against the racial laws coming out of South Africa. And we also had a petition that was signed by more than 138,000 people, as well as a memorandum that compiles the injustices that the ANC had committed against its citizens for the past 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, you look at those images, Mr. Motale, and there's immediately a sense of the world is watching this. This is also a story that South Africa is telling about itself in those very images.
It was actually a very sad day. I can tell you that those Afrikaners are ill-informed in the first instance because they know what the truth is. The other point is that I think they did a disservice to themselves in the sense that their presence and their protest there revealed two things. They are not South Africans in the sense that they didn't sing our national anthem. They sang something which is no more in use. They used the field clear flag, which represents no country. And a few people were there. I mean, there are more Afrikaners who are in this country who say they are not going. I think we are better off if those people can leave this country and go to America. We'll see what will happen to them, how they're going to come back, because they will not be accepted. They won't be spoiled as they are here in South Africa. We have seen Afrikaners in the past, during CODESA, what they did in the form of AWB and the others. We have seen them, what they did in the repercussions of what happened in Bophuthatswana when they were trying to take over. But here's the thing, is that if they think that this country is going to lose its status if they leave, we'll have less racists. And I think we'll be better off, because I can tell you now that they've dented that racial harmony which was there, because now we go back again to say 1976 it was Afrikaans. And then as the years go on, if you still have people like that, then bye-bye for them. Bye-bye.
You know, Thembisa, I bring you in here on this very issue of the Afrikaners, the refugee applications in the U.S. You know, one of the correspondents, our correspondents in Washington, D.C. this week made a note of how the immigration policy at the moment, and certainly Trump's, dealing with immigration is incredibly divisive in the country. You've got immigrants in the U.S. that are being sent to Guantanamo Bay, but at the same time inviting Afrikaners to say, come and be refugees here in the U.S. But there's also the issue of plausibility and feasibility of that actually taking place, which I think is important, right? Around the application actually that's available, or the application process, I suppose, that's available for refugees.
Yes, indeed. But I think the most important thing for me will be the definition of an Afrikaner. What is an Afrikaner? Who's an Afrikaner? And how does an Afrikaner look like? So it'll be interesting to see whether the United States Embassy will refuse access to those people who look like me and claiming to be Afrikaners. Because I don't think that was defined in an executive order. And a lot of people who would just want to go and take chances and embarrass the entire process. But I agree with the fact that the gathering outside the US Embassy yesterday was the first step towards, for me at least, watching a polarized society, a society that's about to collapse. The unity that we've always had of, which has not been necessarily real, is now exposed. That the disunity is now exposed, and you're seeing more Afrikaners singing from different hymn sheets. And that's the beginning of things to come in terms of, unfortunately, seeing that unity that's always been presented by the Afrikaners being dismantled by these calls by Donald Trump. But again, having said that, I think, we must respect the right to assembly, right to protest, and freedom of speech and expression. And that's what they were doing, taking advantage yesterday. There is no law at the moment in South Africa that prohibits such gatherings, and that's what they were doing. But I don't think they represented the majority of the Afrikaner community in this country, and that's going to be highlighted, I think, in the next coming few days.
Yeah, I mean, if there's ever a point to be made around have a country that has a variety of perspectives that are all shared quite openly, I think South Africa certainly is a great example of that. But we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll take a look at some of your WhatsApps. You can send some to 072-110-5584. We'll continue with the week's top stories on the other side of this. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue to, of course, so look at some of the big stories that got South Africa talking in the week that was, taking your WhatsApps on 072-110-5584. A few WhatsApps that have already come in, and taking calls on 010-594-6010. Let's see the messages that have come in from some of our viewers. And there we go. Steve Congo says, South Africa's happenings should be a lesser concern to the US in particular, especially when the intent is to redress the imbalances resulting from apartheid. Steve, thank you so much for sending in that one. Desmond Tlaka says, in my opinion, the newly elected leadership should unite Africa and end colonialism that is still there. Another thing, Africa must have one currency. Okay, Desmond, they're talking on the outcomes of the AU summit. Anonymous says the AU can have new leadership, but our African leaders don't want to liberate their countries from the World Bank and IMF, even though they are part of the 300 committees since 2007. Our African citizens are suffering. Anonymous, thanks for that message. Another anonymous saying, I expect nothing from the newly elected leadership of the AU. Some members who watched the civil war unfold in Sudan, Somalia is still unstable. Mozambique has problems. Libya is still in a mess and remains unstable since Gaddafi was murdered. Chad, Mali, and Burkina Faso are facing huge challenges. Let's see, maybe the new leadership will prove me wrong by resolving the conflicts in Africa. Yeah, we'll wait and see. Mpomaleka says, good evening. The AU is a toothless structure that cannot take any decisive decision on matters related to African problems. To support my statement, DRC is a good example of failure of AU. If the AU wants to be effective, they should join Nigeria, Mali, and Burkina Faso in terms of the decolonization of Africa. They have dismally failed to address a number of problems around Africa. Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, South Sudan, and Western Sahara, the AU must be disbanded. Mpo, thank you so much for sending in that message. Lots of views coming in. We've got Tony calling in from Midrand. Tony, good evening.
Good evening, Malema and your panelists.
Thank you so much for calling. Talk to us.
Yes, actually my point of view is 2 points. Especially regarding USA. I mean, we look at Trump and obviously backed by Elon Musk. They think maybe they are going to rule US forever, and it's only 4-year period. And in that 4-year period, they are signing executive orders which are not currently implemented. They still have to face almost 347 million people of US in terms of delivery, but they are hasty in terms of, decisions, which will backfire according to my view.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, very interesting. Tony says they're not going to rule the US forever. I want to move on to another issue, though. Goodness, the MK party also giving us a lot to talk about this week. Lukhona, I mean, from Duduzile Zumasambudla's ex-utterances and I mean, some of the foul language that people were looking at there online, and then the apology. What do you make of the leadership squabbles at the moment within the MK party? I mean, another big thing has been that speech that was delivered by John Hlophe at the SONA debate, and some wrangling around who wrote that speech, the quality of that speech. What is the MK party doing there?
Naledi, I mean, these are all points of curiosity, but I do want to caution some of your viewers in terms of their utterances. I mean, to say that Elon Musk is a non-issue is actually a very big misstatement. And it must be rebutted for what it is. I mean, you're talking about a tech giant here who can influence propaganda and algorithms in very serious, platforms of communication. So I think that's very important. And I mean, the issue about Malema and him, if you look at the MKP statement on Donald Trump's inauguration, and I've been asking people a very uncomfortable question that they don't want to contend with, which is, what if Elon Musk was to endorse MK party in 2029 in South Africa? Because it's quite clear they've got an interest. And the idea that it's only 4 years is about thinking that there won't be a MAGA 2.0. And we've got to think about who comes after Donald Trump, and what does that, make America Great Again universe look like? But anyway, I just wanted to clarify some of those issues. I mean, of course, the AU 2063 have always had problems. I don't think you can set an agenda that is so far off that the people who set the agenda would not be accountable for it, because they would have been dead by the time it comes to fruition. But I mean, that's a story for another day. Let's come back to MK Party, which is one of my greatest fascinations in South African politics. And I think that, I mean, you've got to look at all the political parties that have broken away from the ANC. They take in quite a serious order all the behaviors and the culture of the ANC, which is factionalism, division, and all of that. And the ANC has actually stood the test of time. The only party that really suffered seriously from the perils of the ANC was the Congress of the People, COPE, which was founded in 2008. And it almost vanished in 2014 elections. So they moved from 2009, 30 elected members of parliament to about 4 members of parliament in 2014. But if you look at the EFF, it managed, even with the whole episode. I mean, where MK Party is, by the way, is where the EFF at some point was. There was even a Save the EFF kind of campaign by the likes of Andile Mnguni, Malichfield Chabalala, and others. And they were all expelled from the EFF, but the EFF actually stood and grew between 2014 and 2019. So what we are seeing in MK Party is naturally what we would expect of a party that has broken away from the ANC. It must take some of the cultural attributes of the ANC with itself. And of course, some of those players are people who actually were instrumental in, factionalism, in division, and so on within the ANC, outside the ANC, even within the EFF, and then now at MKP. So it's unsurprising, really, what is happening at MKP. What I often caution people against, Naledi, as a parting shot, is this idea that says, MKP, if President Zuma dies, then, it will be gone. But the question you must ask is, what if President Zuma leaves as Mugabe did? And then what becomes the effect of that? Because I think people are working on wishful thinking. So we must work on what is before us. President Zuma is alive right now, and he'll be alive tomorrow, and possibly for the next 5 to 10 years. And what then becomes the political posture? Because to pin your hopes on the disintegration of MKP on his death is probably the wrong thing to do. And I've said this a number of times anyway. So the point I'm really making is that what we are seeing in MKP, whether it's Duduzile Zuma and so on, the apology did come. It eventually came. And I think she knew what was at stake. Remember that she's no longer just an ordinary member of parliament. She's also the chair of the caucus of the Southern African caucus in the Pan-Africanist parliament. And those are serious roles to occupy, and to relinquish them simply because you don't want to apologize to Floyd Shivambu. But again, these things must be understood in context. These are people who are peers, right? Your Duduzile, Zuma Sambutla, your Malemas, your Floyds, and your Mbuyiseni Ndlozis. I mean, you saw that photo, Dalimpofu, Shivambu, Ndlozi, and then Malema tweeting on and saying they are all boys. I mean, these are all temperaments of people who are going through stages of grief, and we must accept that. And unfortunately, politics tends to be a lot of noise more than substance.
Well, very interesting. All right, I'm going to take one last call. Mthokozisi is on the line in Pretoria. Mthokozisi, good evening.
Good evening. Just quickly on the point, I have a fond relationship with Lukhona and Thembisa, and I want to say, back on the geopolitics, don't you believe, Thembisa, that it is an opportunity for us now to actually lead a debate about the relationship between Africa and the West provoked by Trump, in the sense that not to be only reactionary about how do we cushion the Washington opinion on Africa, but also get a sense of where we can position and demonstrate about the sense of how Africa wants to participate in the world.
Yeah.
You and I have worked very closely on the topics of the world. It's not this position or this time an opportunity for Africa to actually set the tone about the relationship between Africa and Washington, instead of just reacting to what Trump is saying, but actually clarify the world and how Africa wants to interact with Washington and ultimately lead the conversation.
Thokozisi, thank you so much for that. Thembisa, that one directly for you, and perhaps that being a parting shot as we go around as well for parting shots. So Thokozisi is saying, is it time for Africa to start, really looking at its relationship with the US? And if you actually are going to have, if you actually are going to have a synergized sort of voice in a continent of over 50 countries on relationships with the US, what you say to that? And then I think as a parting shot, an envoy from South Africa to the US to deal with this expropriation matter. What does it say?
Well, the envoy is going via Europe first before it gets to the United States. The rationale that we've been given is that they want to prepare themselves before they meet Donald Trump. I don't know what it means. But I think interactions between Africa and the US have been ongoing and they'll continue to be. But Africa is divided, and with or without the AU, you're not going to have one voice in terms of its international relations or bloc international relations towards the United States. We have China that's now entrenched within Africa. We've got some of the Western countries that still borrow a lot and interact quite comfortably with their former colonizers. So Africans come with various and different voices within the African Union. And I think what we're going to see happening now is we're going to see South Africa embracing a standalone foreign policy to that of the AU, even though, of course, they've been piggybacking now and then on AU foreign policy whenever it suited South Africa. But this time around, what will see happening, South Africa is going to be heading its own standalone foreign policy towards its negotiations with the United States. I think there's going to be very constructive discussions and negotiations between South African delegation, whoever's going to form that delegation with the United States. And you might just see a new relationship emerging. This was probably important for South Africa to prepare itself and embrace themselves for new politics. We've been biting much more than we can chew over the years. Our foreign policy has been very ambitious, and we have been treated kindly by the world. But now, it's time for us to show our strength in terms of negotiations and our foreign relations prowess.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Mr. Motale. I think you can take the last one here. Parting shot, the envoy to the US. What does it say?
I don't take them seriously. I think we lost an opportunity. For example, when Trump started his utterances about we are treating some people in this country not equally. What did we do? We did not go and immediately explain as to he's wrong and what is he wrong about. You see, we kept quiet and we wait for an envoy to go there, but the wrong messages are coming out that people believe that what Trump said. And I think I blame our government that they do have a communications department. We should have worked on telling the world what the truth is. And I feel that they were just wasting time. I take our government and the African leaders when they engage Europe and the other foreign countries, like members of the trade unions, when they engage with employers. They think about themselves first, instead of thinking about the workers they represent. And I think that's a debate for another day to say, what are they going to do? I think they'll just come back with nice suits and jewelry and new watches which they would have bought. And I think it is not right. And it's a waste of time.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll watch for the envoy. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Phalane Motale, the media analyst. Thembisa Fakude, Director and Senior Research Fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues, and Lukhona, Mnguni, political analyst, speaking to us this evening. Thank you for contributing as well to the discussion. We take a short break. We're back in a moment.